In case you somehow didn't know, Resident Evil kind of lit up the gaming world. Its overall makeup not only contained genuine horror, but also gameplay to support it. Unlike typical Capcom fare such as Mega Man, players can only carry a small amount of health and ammo throughout the adventure. This, combined with the iconic fixed camera angles and sprawling environments, formed to create a genuine phenomenon in the world of video games. As with other landmark games, Resident Evil spurred a barrage of clones that all tried to capitalize on Resident Evil's success. Now, not all of them were straight up ripoffs. Fear Effect, for example, is similar with its pre-rendered backgrounds and tank controls, but is also wildly different at the same time. Instead of a zombie-filled mansion or laboratory, Fear Effect takes place in a cyberpunk-inspired world and is more of a traditional PC adventure game. That's what I hear anyways. If you know Capcom like I do, it should come as no surprise that they too wanted to capitalize on RE's success by fast-tracking a series of sequels and spin-offs. Following the original 1996 release, they'd bless us with 3 versions of RE1, 5 versions of RE2, 3 versions of RE3, Resident Evil Code Veronica, and Resident Evil Survivor. And this was all between 1996 and the year 2000. Insane, right? But if you thought Capcom was done, you would be wrong. At this point in time, Capcom was hard at work on the future of RE and had a few ideas as to how to proceed. Within this process, Capcom had the idea to make an RE-style game that takes place in feudal Japan. And if you haven't figured it out by now, Onimusha is that game. Weirdly enough, the game started life as a PS1 game, and as I played through it, yeah, I can tell. But that isn't exactly a bad thing by any means. In Onimusha, you play as Samanosuke on a mission to save Princess Yuki from being sacrificed to the Demon King. The game also draws inspiration from real historical figures and myths to an extent. Oda Nobunaga, known as Japan's Great Unifier, among other things, is at the center of it. In the world of Onimusha, Nobunaga is slain at the start of the game, and in grand fashion. Following this, he makes a deal with the Demon King that would allow him to return to our world and continue his conquest. Interestingly enough, another real-life moniker this man carries is Demon King of the Sixth Heaven. Now, I'm no history buff, and thankfully the game doesn't lean on this a whole lot. Instead, Capcom has crafted a variety of characters and events that are lightly woven into Japan's history. Kaede, for example, is a companion that follows Samanosuke throughout the adventure. She isn't side by side with him or anything though. RE5, this is not. Instead, her role is more like that of Ada Wong in Resident Evil 2. Kaede is running around the same environment doing her own things separate from Samanosuke. And from time to time, you will take control of her to further the story. At the start of the game, Samanosuke is visited by an ogre spirit who grants him a gauntlet that allows him to absorb the souls of felled demons. These souls can then be used to upgrade weapons and orbs. When fighting bad guys, they drop more than just souls. They also drop magic and health refills. So yeah, Samanosuke can use magic. This is actually delivered as a heavy attack, which, as you'd expect, can only be used when you have enough magic juice. Going back to Kaede really quick, she does not utilize souls at all. Instead, she's got a standard weapon and moveset that remains mostly static throughout the game. You can find an upgrade to her weapon at some point, but this is more or less needed to balance the combat when playing as her. Actually, when playing as Kaede, enemies don't drop items of any kind. This means that you have to rely solely upon the herbs and medicine found throughout the environment when playing as her. This can make her segments a bit stressful, but it's important to keep in mind that this also means there is no real reason to engage in combat. The only thing you get for downing your foes is that they are removed from your path, so it's often best just to run past them when possible. Aside from that, you have a lock-on function and a block. Using the block locks you in place, so don't expect to walk around with your guard at the ready. The lock-on function is crucial to unlocking a majority of the complexity in the combat. While locked onto an enemy, you can quickly sidestep, backdash, or dash forward. This maneuverability is what sets the game apart from its Resident Evil lineage. As far as the swordplay goes, there's a small amount of depth here. Put Put simply, you only need to tap a direction in conjunction with a sword swipe and you'll do something different from your typical swipe. For example, hitting down an attack will instigate a gladiator kick, whereas hitting forward an attack performs a jab move. There is also a counter attack, which can be a bit tricky to pull off, but is immensely satisfying. So at this point, I think the question I need to answer is this: does this actually work well? After all, the game does utilize the notoriously stiff tank controls that everyone knows and loves. The short answer? Yes, it absolutely does work. In fact, I was quite surprised the moment I took control and had Samanosuke dashing all over the screen with relative ease. It would seem that Capcom put a great amount of effort into ensuring that this was an easy game for players to pick up. Even the swordplay feels really good. Being able to essentially strafe around my opponents is a godsend. Likewise, being able to release my lock and freely swing my sword at large groups is also immensely helpful and goes a long way toward removing barriers. The only real complaint I have is that the bow and the gun don't feel great, which is kind of hilarious since they function exactly as any attack does in a classic Resident Evil game. You hold the R1 button to ready the weapon and hit the attack button to fire. The game even auto-locks onto the nearest enemy. This seems like a great addition on the surface, and I spent a good chunk of the game trying to figure out why this wasn't feeling right. Then it dawned on me. It's the need to switch from my blade to the bow by pressing the L2 trigger. It seems simple enough, but it doesn't work as well as you would think. If I had to guess, my controller's analog triggers are probably to blame here. On the original PS2 controller, the L2 trigger has no real travel and is a traditional digital membrane button. My 8-bit Do Ultimate controller, as well as most other modern controllers, employ analog triggers. I suspect the game is expecting a digital input, and the porting team simply overlooked this aspect when bringing the game to modern platforms. Thankfully, Steam Input is here to save the day. I simply set the triggers to act like digital buttons while playing the game, and the problem is solved. Since we are already talking about combat, let's dig into the enemy lineup a bit. The starting foes are as simple as you would expect, but are perfect for coming to terms with the game's various control systems. Eventually you graduate to some faster enemies that will jump around the screen a bunch, heavily armored foes who need to be worn down a bit before you can take them out, and then some otherworldly creatures. There aren't a whole lot in terms of variety, but just enough to keep the enemy encounters interesting throughout. I do have one complaint, yet again, and like before, my issue centers around the bow. As you've likely guessed, some enemies use bow and arrow to attack from a distance, which is usually fine, except when you combine these enemies with fixed camera angles. This leads to situations where there is some baddie pegging you with arrows from somewhere off screen while you are dealing with dudes in closer proximity. It can be very frustrating, to say the least. Now, it is possible that the full screen mode used in this remaster is simply zooming in too far and occluding some of these guys from view, but I don't think that's the case every time. As you'd expect in a game where you play as a samurai, or any video game I guess, there are boss fights in Onimusha. I'm somewhat mixed on these. I won't say they are outright bad, but sometimes they're simply not impactful. Other times they're wildly frustrating because you're all of a sudden being expected to use your best skills after spending most of the game relying on basic attacks and getting on just fine. But these are the outliers. The boss fights that take place in between these are generally fun and challenging in the right ways, and in contradictory fashion, even those outliers end up feeling pretty satisfying when all is said and done. Seeing as Onimusha is spun from the Resident Evil cloth, it should come as no surprise that the game contains a few puzzles. The good news is that most of these are pretty enjoyable overall. You have these boxes locked with a sort of number puzzle throughout the game, and these are probably the most common and the most enjoyable of the bunch. But there are also these boxes that require you to answer a question in order to unlock the box. The answer to the question is hidden within various books you'll find throughout the environment, and I'll be honest, I am somewhat indifferent to these. They aren't especially bad, but also needlessly drawn out since you have to find the books first. The most infamous puzzle of the bunch is the segment where Samanosuke and Kaede have to navigate a room full of spike pits, followed immediately by a block moving puzzle. The room with the spike pits wasn't especially frustrating my first time around, but when I arrived at the block moving puzzle, well, I was most definitely frustrated with this one. There are a few problems here. First, the game puts you on a timer. Second, figuring out how to move the blocks was somehow escaping me. I'd click on the block and then hit the direction to move it, but nothing would happen. After a few tries, I realized I had to click and hold the block, then move it. I feel like the game could have been designed to accommodate a more natural approach here and be a bit less abrasive as a result. But then again, I did manage to figure it out and can't imagine I'll make that mistake a second time. The last noteworthy thing I'd like to discuss is how well streamlined the game is. It's almost hard to get lost or stuck in Onimusha, and when you do, it's usually something you simply overlooked. Going into this game for the first time, I decided I'd just enter each room that came my way as soon as I discovered it, and this pretty much led me to wherever I needed to go. The few times I deviated from this plan, I'd find myself lost for a brief period of time, only to realize I should have entered that one door I decided to skip for whatever reason. While I found this streamlined design to be mostly great, I also couldn't help but feel like I was just going through the motions at times. There wasn't any kind of exploration happening, and that was a bit of a bummer. There are other issues I found with the game too. While I'm sure many players will appreciate having the option to hot swap between tank controls and camera relative controls, the camera relative controls still kinda suck for this style of camera system. But Capcom did what they could, to be fair. How can I describe this? Okay, I'll start by explaining the problem with camera relative movement in a game with fixed camera angles. Say you're in a scene where the up direction is north, but in the next camera angle, up is south due to the way the camera changed its position. This can land you in a loop of running back and forth between scenes and frustration. This, folks, is why we have tank controls in the first place. Well, for Onimusha, Capcom implemented a system that maintains your direction from the previous scene for just a moment to allow you time to reorient. Just in case that doesn't make any sense, here's a short demonstration. The next issue I have isn't the worst thing in the world, but a problem nonetheless. And honestly, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but the game kind of needs a tutorial of some kind. At least where combat is concerned. Now, I don't necessarily mind having to figure things out on my own. That's one of the best parts about classic video games in my opinion. But when I'm skating along without too much issue, then run into a boss that requires me to use tactics that I didn't know existed, then we have a problem. I'm assuming this info is probably in the game's manual, but it seems like something that could have been added to the remaster, at the very least. Then again, it's possible a digital manual was included with the game, but I didn't bother to check. Who does? Can we talk about this craptastic map? I genuinely struggled to make use of this thing at all. When you open the map screen, you're presented with the various maps you've acquired, and they're all nicely labeled. But the problem is that I don't know where I am in the first place. This meant that I had to open one map after another to find my position. I feel like they forgot to make the map automatically open to the area that I'm exploring, because that's how Resident Evil works, and they had made several of those games in the years leading up to Onimusha's release. Fortunately, as I said earlier, the game is very streamlined. Just don't open the map thinking it's somehow going to help you. Lastly is the voice acting. Some characters, like Samanosuke and Kaede, are well voiced, but most of the other voices are a bit too over the top for my liking. I was getting serious RE4 flashbacks hearing some of this stuff. Ugh.
You! Why don't you go back to playing with your worthless little toys? I have no time for you!
What did you say? How dare you! A mere human mock me? Fine then. It's time for you to fight my greatest creation! Come on, Celeste!
That's not to say the sound is overall bad though. But before I can discuss that, I need to give you a bit of a history lesson. You see, when Capcom was prepping the Resident Evil Director's Cut for release, it hired a deaf composer to put together a new orchestrated soundtrack for the game. While the soundtrack is mostly fine, it also contained this stinker. What does this have to do with Onimusha? Well, the guy also composed the music for this game, and it turns out that he was not, in fact, deaf. What this means to us is that we have a strange situation on our hands. If you go buy the recent HD release of Onimusha today, it has a completely different soundtrack, not the one developed by the not-so-deaf composer. Apparently, this is due to a legal issue. So how is the new soundtrack? Well, it has many peaks and valleys, meaning some of the tracks are classically spooky while others are pretty boisterous. You'll be in one room with a RE1-like dirge playing, and then the next room will be an overly dramatic score. It's a bit strange. On the flip side of that, the original soundtrack is much more fitting and balanced. So much so that I had to actively pay attention to the music playing in order to have anything to say about it. There isn't anything wrong with it, it's just kind of there. All that being said, I did like the way the new soundtrack calls back to Resident Evil 1. Fittingly nostalgic. Visually, the game is quite the looker on the PS2. It featured a higher resolution than the PS1 could produce, and the capabilities of the PS2 allowed for higher fidelity character models that better fit the highly detailed environments. The HD remaster is a similar story, but does suffer a bit from a resolution mismatch between the 3D models and the 2D backgrounds. But as you've seen in this video, there is a fix in the form of a 4K texture pack. So what do I think of Onimusha Warlords? I kind of love it. But it didn't start out that way. I struggled to get into the game for the first 2 hours or so. It wasn't outright bad, just a bit unremarkable. It played well, looked nice, but just didn't do anything exciting. I'm glad I pressed on though, as the latter half of the game really seemed to find its stride and become a blast to play. So much so that I'm anxious to jump into the sequel, and that says quite a bit since I had no plan of picking up that game. If you like classic Resident Evil gameplay, you'll probably find a lot to love with Onimusha. It's not a survival horror game in the least, but it's still a lot of fun. and its relatively short runtime of about 5 hours is nice for a quick jaunt from time to time. If you decide to check it out for yourself, be sure to let me know what you thought of the game. And with that, I will talk to you guys next time. Thanks for watching.